That's it. Okay, we are in for more, and I think this part of the program is something I also very much look forward to. And before we get into that, I would like to ask our president, Garrett Riegg, to come forward, and he will introduce you to someone else you all know, and then let's see where the story will take us.
Thank you, Jan. Are we on yet? Okay. ITC is full of stories and wonderful serendipitous events. And I will tell you that for many years, you know that the Adyar group was minimally involved with ITC. And then on the scene came Jan. And Jan talked to Jim Colbert. And they started thinking about places where we could have meaningful conferences. The site means a lot. We really think about, where should we be in the world and what is the most appropriate place. And of course, our missing link was, so to speak, the Adyar Theos was the largest group in the world. So at the time, I was corporate secretary and happened to be a member of the TS of America and had just been elected president of my local lodge. But I'd never been to Wheaton, didn't know anything about it. And Jan apparently did some pioneer work, talked to people in Wheaton, and perhaps with Betty Bland. Anyway, Jim told me, Garrett, we need you to go to Wheaton and look at the place and talk to them and see if they would be willing to offer their facilities for next year's conference. This was in April, I think. And I said, well, okay, I'd like to see Wheaton. It's a wonderful place. And I knew Betty Bland mostly from magazines and articles and things like that. So I went hat in hand, feeling rather intimidated, frankly. I'm, not even the head of this organization, and it's a very tiny organization. But anyway, I get to Wheaton, and I finally sit down with Betty. And within a few moments, I just felt so good. It was, she's so kind, so gracious, that I felt right at home. And we had to go through a lot of information exchange, not just the facilities, but the spirit of things, and where we were headed as an organization and how that works with different other organizations. And I also should tell you that Betty, for me, was practically a legend because she'd been there for 9 years. She'd done 3 consecutive terms as president. And so at that very moment, we got talking, and I stayed a couple days and felt very much at home. And she introduced me at some point to Tim Boyd. And I think the next day, the election results came through, and Tim announced and accepted his becoming the next president. And I was very privileged to be there. Well, I can't remember if they had to get their board approval or how complicated it was, but within weeks, we had a green light. And we knew that we could have the next conference the following year in Wheaton. And that was a wonderful breakthrough. And, I haven't seen Betty a lot, but she's always deep in my heart, because those 3 days were kind of magical for me at the center. Learning so much, seeing so much, meeting so many interesting people. And then the following year, having our conference there was a wonderful breakthrough. And I should also say, Tim, getting elected maybe a month and a half before our next conference, all of a sudden, not only are we going to have the conference next year in Wheaton, but Tim is going to come to the Julian conference in 2011. So he made rather quick plans, came out, and of course was a great hit with everyone and greatly contributed to our conference. So it's been a very smooth developing direction for us at ITC. And so I also know that Betty as a wonderful Southern woman with all the, not only the graciousness, but the strength of those Southern ladies, has stayed active in the world. And I'm really interested to hear more, I hope, about her current activities, especially with something called Moral Mondays. I think she got in a little trouble recently with that. She might share that with you later. I don't think I should probably spill all the beans. But I want to introduce Betty so she can also then introduce someone who you all know, but it's well worth another introduction. So Betty, would you come up and introduce Tim Boyd? Betty Bland.
Well, I will confess that you have before you someone with a criminal record now. I'm very proud to say that I was arrested about 3 or 4 weeks ago as a part of political protest and civil disobedience. So that I feel is a feather in my cap. I have to comment about what you were saying about your initial contacts with me. First, Jan asked me what I thought about our cooperation, and I said, well, I think it's a great idea. And then tentatively, Jim communicated with me, and I said, and this is the way Southerners do it, I said, you know, it's like our Southern families, and I have a very extended Southern family, and we are all independent families, and we all, you know, live our own lives, but we're like kissing cousins. We love to get together for reunions, and if somebody has a problem, we'll help them out. So that was the metaphor that we used when we first started communicating, that we would be delighted to be kissing cousins. And I will bring a little update too. Tim and I were early Theosophists in the 70s, young Theosophists in the 70s. And I ended up going to the New York 1975 centennial there. And it was the first time I heard that there were other theosophical groups. I had no idea. And there was somebody, I think I've got his first name right, Herbert Spinks, who wrote Theosophists Reunite. And I thought, reunite? How can they reunite? I thought we were already one. And then later I heard that there had been various, you know, little ripplings during that particular time, because people had an idea of separateness. And I think our whole world has moved from a sense of authority, you know, hierarchical thinking, to networking. I mean, that is the new motif, and so we're just right in tune with the current motif. So to get back to Tim then, I just had to throw that in since you brought that up. Tim has been a dear friend since we first met in the Theosophical conferences. I have always appreciated him. He has a great sense of humor. He has a great depth. And he first came to Theosophy through a wonderful teacher. And I had the privilege to be acquainted with that teacher as well. And knowing what a great teacher Tim started with, I'd say influenced me early on to recognize Tim's qualities. His teacher gave him a strong foundation in the teachings, but he did more than that. He was involved in community, really an intentional theosophical community, and Tim may or may not speak of that. But in that community, daily, besides meditating and study, they were living the principles every day. And it was not an easy cakewalk. It was difficulties. They were in a very difficult section of South Side of Chicago, and yet they lived those principles every day. And that's one of the things that I think makes Tim so qualified for the situation he is moving into or has moved into now. Is not only a solid background, but also in the teachings, but also a solid background in working through community. What better way to figure out how to work with unity within unity than to have to really be elbow to elbow day after day. So, Tim, I think you're wonderful. I've served on boards with you. You've been my vice president, and we've worked together well. And I present to you Tim Boyd for the next, and who is now the international president, and he will give you some words of wisdom.
Well, I want to thank Betty. It's a very good thing to be around good old friends. It's a better thing to have them introduce you. Because no matter what the truth of the matter may be, she makes me look good. And I do appreciate it. I'm very thankful to all of you to have taken the time to come out. I'm thankful to Herman and Jan, Garrett, all of the people who have put in so much time and so much effort for this event to even be possible. Obviously, there are times when people stand in front, but without the people that have stood behind to make all of this possible, then there's nothing that can happen. So I think that's something that is true of this particular conference. It's also the only way that this movement that we have been associated with, this Theosophical Movement, has ever been able to not only flourish, I should say not only survive, but to actually flourish and to arrive at a time when certain factors within this global context seem to be changing in ways that are hold great promise. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But I do feel that as Theosophists, one of the things that is just part of our situation is that we are the recipients of an inheritance. Something has flowed to us, a great wealth has come to us that really we did nothing really to earn this wealth of theosophy that has somehow been bestowed upon us by virtue of our being born in a particular time, being born in a particular situation and culture, and for whatever our temperament and our past karma might have allowed, somehow we were open to it. So now we have inherited, and we have inherited richly. And so when you look at it, probably all of us are familiar with what can happen when there is great wealth that is inherited by the next generation. I know that I have seen families that children of wealthy parents who suddenly find themselves in the position of inheriting the life's work of those who came before. And to watch what unfolds is always a fascinating story, because it can unfold in many different ways. It can unfold with people becoming completely worthless for having been so wealthy without a comprehension of what it is that has been given to them. in our own theosophical history, we're very much aware of the way that this wisdom of theosophy, which probably, if we were to call it correctly, in the initial stages of the presentation of theosophy, there was a wisdom that stood behind information, which some developed into a knowledge. But wisdom and knowledge, wisdom and information are not the same thing. And so in the very early days, it's almost surprising to think that some of the people that were closest to the very sources of this, the recipients of the letters from the masters of the wisdom, the many people who gathered around HPB, were some of the ones who were the most critical and the most doubting of what was being given to them. So we know that sort of history. Any of us who are members of specific organizations within the Theosophical Society, we can chart our own histories back, headed back toward that moment when HPB and the masters, when this thing called modern-day theosophy came into the world. So we all have those histories. But that's, as has been said by others, that is a past. It's a past that's worth knowing. It's a past that is worth remembering so that it does not become repetitive. So there's this inheritance that has come our way. When you really look at the way that this theosophical movement has been developed, you find that our early founders, in many ways, they had a great advantage that we didn't have. HPB in Key to Theosophy, she talks about how the Theosophical Society came into being. She talks about the guidance that was given from its inner founders in bringing this movement that has made its way deeply into the world, in bringing it into being. She says that the guidance that they received was mainly the broad principles that are embodied in our three objects, with the first thing being universal brotherhood, oneness, unity. But that those three principles were the main things that the guidance that they were given were structured around. As far as who would be the people that they would work with, what would be the structure of this organization, how you would disseminate its teachings, all of the details, well, that was the only thing they didn't get any guidance about. Principles, but then every single thing that they had to do thereafter, every bit of it was pioneering work, was making their way through a landscape, through a territory that was completely uncharted, that they had no examples to draw upon. Every single thing had to be done afresh and anew. And they made countless mistakes. And they dropped that mistake and moved on to the next mistake. But along the way, because of the sincerity and because of the true power and beauty and truth of the source of their efforts, something got seeded into this world. So that was the work. That was the work that they were doing. Very often when I think about the early work that was being done at that time, I do in fact think of it in these terms, like a farmer doing their work. The farmer plants a seed. Farmer doesn't create a seed. They receive a seed, they plant it. The work of the farmer is to make sure that the soil is of the highest quality. It's to water it. It's to nurture it. It's to try to feed it. Anyone I know who's a farmer, it's not a life that I would lend myself to so easily, because you have to get up awfully early in the morning. I'm an early morning person, but every day? But attuning themselves with these cycles. Of course, the seeds that we're talking about, which are the seeds of this Theosophical movement, are really seeds that are planted into the soil of the consciousness of humanity. And when you think about it, we're talking about 1875 and onward. So you have a movement that has its beginning, that comes to bring in these certain very powerful seeds that are hoped to grow, but are so at odds with the thinking of the time that it's going to be a fight. To us, the sort of core ideas that were brought in through the Theosophical movement are ideas that are quite familiar. The conceptual basis of Theosophy was something that really did not exist in any organized form at that time. HPB had the task, one that I don't envy her for, one that she suffered an entire life for, willingly, of trying to bring first a conceptual knowledge into the world, a world that was unaccepting. But she herself said that what she was bringing was really incapable of being understood until the 20th century. Lived a life completely geared to a time more than 100 years past the time that she would be dead and gone. And every day that she got up, every moment that she worked, every book that she wrote was pointed toward this future moment when these present seeds would come to flower. To me, it's remarkable. It's remarkable. I have difficulty planning toward next week. Where will I be? What will I do? What will be the results of what I'm doing today, next week? She was looking 100 years ahead, and rightly so. The vision that she applied to this, now we find that it's something that is actually bearing fruit. So certain powerful ideas, I have tended to just to give numbers to these. To me, there are 5 key ideas, which contain multiple others. But the first thing that came in with HPB and with the Theosophical movement was this idea of oneness, universal brotherhood, which in 2014, anybody who does not think along those lines, we think of as being very backward. That somehow or another, they're from another age, but certainly they don't get it. I mean, nowadays, civil rights movements have occurred, decolonization movements have occurred. There is a universal bill of human rights that is the necessary acceptance of the world community. All of these ideas now are present with us, but they were not in colonial India of the 1870s. Or in the various segregated communities of America, Europe, Africa, you pick it. It was an idea that was out of step with the times, but is completely in tune today. A second idea that she introduced was this idea of the multidimensional nature of being and of us as beings. The idea that what was described in the Maha Chohan's letter as brutal materialism that was being forwarded so rapidly through the science of the day, and to a large degree through the science of our day, was something that was degrading humanity,
but it was something that was degrading because it was so limiting. It reduced all things to this physical, material realm and insisted upon it. And so you had a choice. Either you go with science, that was the leading curve of human thinking at the time, which would root you in materialism, or you went with what they call in American church practice, pie in the sky, when I die, by and by. The promise of heaven, if you will just do like I tell you right now. So it was the two options, materialism, superstition. But this presentation and this demonstration that we exist on multiple levels, and that the most profound of those levels is in fact what would be described as the spiritual dimension of our being, was not something that had been shared in any meaningful way, and certainly not in a way that was as clear as the sort of ideas of the sevenfold nature of reality. So this multidimensional aspect of reality now demanded a certain level of consideration. And HPB would go further. She always would force things. So, even if you're going to insist that everything is materially based, then how do you explain someone sitting and roses falling when she makes it happen? How do you consider creating cups and saucers? She would do all these phenomena, which A.P. Sinnett, in his self-proclaimed wisdom, was certain that this was really the way to persuade the West, and that if you could just engineer the one great phenomena, then everybody would respect and fall in line with this theosophical view. His great phenomena that he suggested to the Mahatmas was something that was just so utterly unthinkable, so beyond anything that science could grasp. The daily newspaper that comes out today in London, if you would just do like I say, me the Englishman, and materialize it here in India, the game is over. Everybody's going to salute and bow down to Theosophy. Living in 2014, I start to think that phenomena. I have a daughter with a cell phone, and that phenomena happens every day. It's like, is she persuaded? I don't know. But this concept that somehow, and that was one of the things HPB regretted and the Mahatma spoke about. But in her earnestness, her zealousness to make the point. So that's a second idea. There's a third of these powerful seeds that has been planted. I should say, too, that this idea of multidimensional being is something that is largely coming to the fore now, even in the realm of traditional contemporary science. It's starting to become very difficult to deny the role of consciousness in the various processes that are scientifically examined. That's cracking and will crumble. So yet another thing has progressed from that time that HPB came. The third thing that I designate is this idea that really flows along with this multidimensionality, that there is nothing that we can describe as empty space. Again, in 2014, that's common knowledge. Even at the scientific level, the room is filled with waves. This talk and our gathering is being seen around the world because of the various sorts of means within the electromagnetic spectrum that makes that possible. So that's an easy concept. But the other idea that is a corollary is that it's not just physically empty space, but that the space in which we inhabit from moment to moment is filled with other sorts of conscious entities, that we live in an intelligent universe, and we are surrounded continually by degrees and variations of intelligent life, much of which interacts, reacts upon us, sometimes unconsciously. But it's something that opens up deeper possibilities. HPB tried to examine that through the realm of spiritualism, what it was and what it was not. And so this idea, again, that there is no empty space is something that has been planted, yet another seed. A fourth idea is that I just describe it generally as self-responsibility, that contrary to many of the sorts of religious doctrines that we might encounter, that there is in fact no outside power that determines the life of any individual, that this principle of the pilgrim soul who through self-devised efforts makes its pilgrimage through this particular realm is something that was asserted through her. Of course, it links to a number of other sorts of concepts. And then the fifth idea, and one that was not present, but again that is getting great traction these days, is the idea of spiritual evolution. That Darwin's theory is one thing, but then also the idea that consciousness unfolds, and that the necessity that comes out of that, of the fact of the masters of the wisdom, the linking it to cycles within this process of unfoldment, that was an idea that too was planted as one of these seeds. So what do we find now? In the world today, 2014, we find ourselves functioning in a very different context than what HPB found herself in. Today, many of these ideas have ripened, and they're finding expression in countless ways which all of us are familiar with, but which we may not necessarily recognize as flowing from these seeds planted in human consciousness. The movement that describes itself as ecology, the science related to the interconnections that we find between all living things, is a scientific basis demonstrating this idea of oneness. All of the things that are being, the experimentation that's being done, the Dalai Lama has actually been instrumental in getting many scientists to sign on, and the findings that are coming in about what they describe as the neuroplasticity of the brain. The fact that consciousness clearly affects matter. And through certain meditation practices that they have studied, how the brain becomes restructured in a physical way, is something that is, again, just a clear understanding of these interconnections and the primacy of consciousness. So all of these things find their way to our time now. And probably the thing that is the most, at this point, perhaps one of the most useful tools in the scientific world is the whole realm of quantum physics, whose language and whose thinking is so clearly aligning itself with so many of these concepts. The idea of non-locality, that all things, you take an electron here and you take an electron on the other side of the solar system, and the fact that they are mutually intertwined, they're entangled, talks about this oneness, and many other things within the language of quantum physics. So we've reached a time that was impossible for HPB. In many ways, there was a time of planting, there was a time of nurturing, and it really does seem that at this particular point, we find ourselves on the cusp of what could be described as a time of harvest. And I feel it's no accident that as so many things converge on this moment, that we also find ourselves at a time when within our own somewhat fractured theosophical movement, you find an ITC occurring. The only accidents that exist in this universe are the ones that exist because we can't see a deeper pattern. So something is at play. There is an opportunity that seems to be revealing itself in this world at the moment. And so then the only question that remains is, what do we do about it? That's always the tough question. So what do we do? What are our guidelines? Where do we look to try and think through this moment, to try and connect ourselves more deeply with it? And so again, I don't think it's any accident that one of the main focuses of this particular conference is the Mahachohan's letter. When I was first invited to come to the conference here, I was coming as Tim Boyd, Theosophist par excellence. I also had the designation at that time of president of the Theosophical Society in America. And I have Betty largely to blame for that title. To blame and to thank. Obviously, events conspired during that time in such a way that, by the time I reach Naarden, well, I'm coming as Tim Boyd, but now I'm also coming as the international president of the Theosophical Society. That's a change. But during the course of this whole, the Theosophical Society, for those of you who are not familiar with its particular method of designating leadership, it comes from that background that Aristotle described as one of the more degraded forms of government, democracy. I don't know how he had that idea. But it's an elected sort of thing. So during the course of this election period, a question that many people would ask, what is your vision for the Theosophical Society? Tell us what new vision you are bringing to bear on this particular moment and this particular opportunity. And, in many ways, it's certainly a valid question, but often it's asked in the spirit of, tell us something new. But for me, maybe I'm a humble man, maybe I'm not. But whether I am or whether I'm not, I don't believe that my vision will exceed that of the Mahachohan. And there, within that particular one letter, I think, the vision for what it is that we have to do has been very strongly and very clearly expressed, if we would just look at it. Because in no uncertain terms, one of the very different things from many spiritual movements about the Theosophical movement is that it's not focused on us, you, me. It's not focused on how good you can get to be, on how peaceful you can become, on how enlightened you can think yourself to be, or even how enlightened you can actually be. Those are all wonderful things. They're necessary things as well. But necessary toward what end? If that's all there was to it, then pick any other religion. You got it. Just get yours and go on about your business. But that hasn't been the theosophical approach, which, it might be partially a reason for why it's only attractive to certain people. Because the approach that has been emphasized again and again and again has been that whatever sorts of unfoldments in consciousness we are able to bring about through our practice, through our study, it's completely focused on this idea of uplifting humanity, of lightening some of the karma of this world, of creating some sort of staging ground for humanity to make a step to the next necessary stage in our growth. And that's what it's for. And if you're here for anything else, well, you might get it, but then it's really more distractions than anything else. So that's the point. So, at the outset of the Mahachohan's letter, what is spoken about is that in order for Theosophy and this movement that sprang up out of it to react upon, to have a practical reaction upon the moral code of the day, there has to be some popularizing of a knowledge of Theosophy. But the key message is, why are we here? So that there can be some reaction upon the code of values that are the basis for any choice that anyone makes at any point in any life. Why do I choose this color? Because for me, I like the color. There's certain values related to everything that we do. And it was clearly seen by the Mahachohan, to whose vision, the quote is, to whose vision the future lies like an open page. It was clearly seen that the point of this movement was in some way to react upon a humanity that was clearly headed in the wrong direction. And that these things had to be inculcated gradually. So we've witnessed this gradual inculcation. So I think the thinking that lies before us and the work that lies before us during our time together here at the ITC, and more importantly, during our time when we leave from the ITC, is the thinking about what is it that we can do that will have the deepest impact on human society. That one's big. So what is it I can do that will have the deepest impact on my nation? That's big too. What is it I can do that will have the deepest impact in my community? In my family. And of course, it begins with in myself. But always the focus is, there is something that we value as a treasure. Anyone who has devoted the time, the necessary effort, the study, to immerse themselves in this thing we've called Theosophy, finds that there's a power there. There's a beauty there. There is something that is clearly of a potential to transform. Otherwise, why are we here? So that's the experience. So how to enable this sort of transformation? I don't think anybody doubts that the world could use it. That seems to be pretty clear. If any of you are news watchers,
then you might even be pessimists at this point. I should share with you, I ran across a quote. One of the premier scientists involved in inventing the atom bomb, Oppenheimer, who actually was in communication through a series of letters with Boris Dezerkov. We have those letters in the archive where Boris would write to various people. He has a letter from Einstein, letter from Oppenheimer. But one of the quotes from Oppenheimer's is, "Optimists believe that this is the best of all worlds. Pessimists fear that it's true." It's a pessimistic quote. But for us, I've always taken the point of view that ultimately it's the optimist that is correct. Hands down. The person that envisions the possibility of an unfoldment of goodness, the person that envisions the possibility that a universal brotherhood is in fact potentially real, that's the optimist. So I would hope that during our time together that we would find ways to actually magnify our connection with this wealth that we have received and to figure out ways also to try to share that. I'm very grateful for being asked to speak to you at this time, and I do thank you for your kind attention during this time. So thank you all.
Thank you, Tim Boyd. Take a sip of water. Okay, what is it you can do? What is it I can do? What is it we can do together? I will not give a resume of Tim's talk. I can't do it. It was profound and straight from the heart. And that's what we should do, all of us, to talk with our heart and also listen with our heart. And that ain't easy. Okay. Dinner is served at 6:30. We give you